The the situation in Iraq. What do you see there now? What do you think the state of Iraq is right now?
I think Iraq is much better off than it was before we went in '03 and got rid of Saddam Hussein. I think we are close to achieving most of our objectives. We've seen a significant reduction in the overall level of violence. It's lower now than virtually any time since we've been there in the spring of '03. We've seen the elimination of one of the world's worst regimes. We've seen the Iraqis write a constitution and hold 3 national elections. We've now entered into a strategic framework agreement with the Iraqis that calls for ultimately the U.S. completion of the assignment and withdrawal of our forces from Iraq. All of those things, I think, by anybody's standard would be, excuse me, evidence of significant success. And I think we're very close to achieving what it is we set out to do 5 years ago when we first went into Iraq.
I want to ask you this because I've gotten various accounts about this. When we decided to go into Iraq, we told Saddam Hussein to leave or else. To either leave or we were coming in there to take him out. Did you really think that he would stand and fight?
We didn't know. Now you look back on it, he clearly was into self-deception in a major way. I think he totally underestimated George Bush and what we were prepared to do. He tried to sort of bluff his way through, I guess, would be the best way to describe it, and we called his bluff. He'd been in a business. This is a guy who'd started 2 wars, who'd killed hundreds of thousands of people, including many of his own, with weapons of mass destruction. It was one of the most despicable regimes of the 20th century. And he thought he could get away with continuing that, and I think he assumed the U.S. would never go in, and he was wrong.
Do you think on reflection that, in fact, we did have a bad plan? I mean, when you stop back, people in the military were saying it would take a much larger force than we decided to go in with. And in fact, we had a force that was mobile, it was quick, we were able to get to Baghdad. But once we got there, the Iraqis just sort of faded into the civilian population. We didn't really have enough people to guard those ammo dumps that Saddam Hussein abandoned. Wouldn't it have been better on reflection to have had a better and a larger force?
Well, we could debate that forever, and we may well. I think the original campaign was masterfully done in terms of a small, fast-moving force, as you say, that achieved our initial objectives of taking down the regime and capturing Baghdad. That was a masterful performance. I think the thing that we underestimated, at least I underestimated, was the damage that had been done to the Iraqi population by all those years of Saddam's rule, so that there weren't any Iraqis early on who were willing to stand up and take responsibility for their own affairs. Anybody who'd had that kind of get up and go in earlier years had their head chopped off. And I think we underestimated the damage that had been done during those years of Saddam's rule, as well as what happened in '91. You may remember when they rose up after the Gulf War, and Saddam, very brutally and very aggressively put down those uprisings around the country. So I would chalk that up to miscalculation. I'm not at all sure that having had 400,000 or 500,000 troops there would have achieved the objective we're talking about. What we finally did, what finally sort of got us across the goal line here, was the surge the president decided upon, coupled with a counterinsurgency strategy.
But isn't that, isn't that just underline that the original strategy was wrong? I mean, once you got enough troops in there to handle the situation, things calmed down.
Well, but the number of troops we put in weren't that much more than we'd had there before. We added 5 brigades. This is maybe 30,000 men. And it was up close to where we'd been at the time of the elections, when we had forces there to monitor the elections and to provide security for the Iraqis to hold elections. We never went over 200,000 troops. We were always significantly below that, and we still succeeded.
Well, how do you think we got it so wrong? I mean, we thought he had weapons of mass destruction, and he didn't. We thought we'd be greeted with open arms, and we weren't. What happened?
Well, I don't look at it as we got it so wrong, Bob. I think we have, in
We
fact.
got a big part of it wrong.
Well,
There
certain
weren't
parts
any
of it.
weapons of mass destruction.
Correct. The original intelligence was wrong, no question about it. But there were parts of it that were right. It wasn't 100% wrong. It was correct in saying he had the technology. It was correct in saying he still had the people who knew how to build weapons of mass destruction. I think it was also correct in the assessment that once sanctions came off, he'd go back to doing what he'd been doing before. Where it was wrong was it said he had stockpiles, and he clearly didn't. So the intelligence was flawed. But you never have perfect intelligence in this business. You got to deal with the best you can in terms of making your decisions. The question of how we moved forward, you can debate about whether or not we had the right structure in place, for example. Would we have been better off with setting up a government in exile with exiled Iraqis and getting that organized and in place before we went in and then turning it over to them? We made the judgment that if we were going to take down the government, we had an obligation to try to restore the best kind of system we could, and that was to give them a shot at
Do
true
you
democracy.
think that perhaps you looked at the intelligence and saw what you wanted to see rather than make a real logical analysis of what you saw?
No, I don't, Bob. I think if you go back and you look at what we were receiving as intelligence from the intelligence community, going back to the very day we were sworn in, I've seen a report, for example, that was one of the very first we received, that warned about Iraqi's weapons of mass destruction program. As a matter of fact, it was written by a guy who's been one of the public critics of what we did. He was responsible for that first report. We had reporting like that all the time we were there, right up until we went into Iraq. So it wasn't a matter just of us looking and seeing what we wanted to see. Everybody believed that intelligence. Saddam Hussein had peddled the notion to his senior officers and officials. They all believed he had weapons of mass destruction. The intelligence services of other countries, the Clinton administration that had been there for 8 years before we had exactly the same conclusion that we had, and we had numerous reports afterwards with all the studies that were done, the Rob Silberman Commission, the Senate Intelligence Committee, that said that there was no manipulation of the data, no pressure brought to bear on the analysts. This is what they saw, and they got part of it wrong.
All right. Well, let's take a break here. We'll come back and talk about this and other things some more in just a second.